Hello, it's Mr. Fusion, your favorite femme gremlin. We've just been treated to a new Dragon Ball series, baby. Or a new baby Dragon Ball series, depending on how you feel about it. I'm recording this before it came out. Anyway, I'm here with another video discussing the names in Dragon Ball, what they mean, and how they've been rendered in English. People seem to have liked these, so I brought it back. This time, instead of talking about the names of characters in Dragon Ball, you wanted me to talk about attack names. I agree, it would be fun to tackle as well as sufficiently different from what I've done before. Names for attacks and techniques are interesting because unlike Dragon Ball character names, which are often English words approximated in Japanese phonemes, attack names tend to be very Japanesey to reflect that martial arts aesthetic. They're also often communicating a lot more than just a random vegetable. So a big question when it comes to techniques is not only are they being translated accurately, but do they need to be translated at all? For example, pronunciation aside, we English speakers are totally okay with karaoke being left untranslated. Most of us probably don't know that it's a combination of kara, or empty, and oke, an abbreviation of orchestra, or orchestra, but we still understand what it refers to. And in various localizations of Dragon Ball, we have seen some techniques get the karaoke treatment, and some that are very much translated out. It's quite a hodgepodge, and we're going to look at a diverse selection today. I tend to be of the school that leaves attacks untranslated, but it's still good to know what they mean. Let's get right to it! We're opening with, unarguably, the most well-known and popular attack in all of Dragon Ball. It's the Kamehameha. Kame-sennin created it, Goku learns it, Jackie Chun knows it, pretty soon everybody's doing it. It's Dragon Ball's first Ki Blast attack, Ki referring to a type of spiritual power. We'll see that crop up again soon. Unlike most of the techniques we're looking at today, the Kamehameha is written primarily in hiragana instead of in kanji. Hiragana represents sounds and they don't inherently have meaning. They're kinda like our alphabet. Remember that. But it's pretty appropriate for a move that is often pronounced sound by sound. The only exception to this is the final symbol, which is the kanji for ha, or wave. That's the only part of the attack that has an explicit meaning. Again, the first part of the word is only ever written as the individual kana for the sounds ka and me. It's never actually written with the kanji for the word kame that appears on things like the uniforms that Kame-sennin gives his students. But from context, it's fairly reasonable to assume that the kame in Kamehameha is at least alluding to the Japanese word for turtle. And we know what the ha means. That just leaves the hame, right? Well, it's often claimed on the English-speaking internet that Kamehameha means turtle destruction wave. Where does that come from? Well, the Japanese word for destruction is hametsu. And so, English-speaking fans extrapolate that the hame is actually a shortening of hametsu. Is that true? Well, it's possible. But then again, my car isn't called a car because it's short for carpet. Two words sharing some of the same sounds doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's easy to make a claim, it's harder to disprove it. To my knowledge, no one connected to the creation of Dragon Ball has refuted it. But also to my knowledge, no one has ever spoken to such a claim at all. But that doesn't mean nothing has been said about the Kamehameha. Dragon Ball's author, Toriyama Akira, explains the origin of the name in the Super Exciting Guide. For the name Kamehameha, I was wondering whether there was a decent name along the lines of something something ha. When my wife said, as a joke, Kamehameha would be fine, wouldn't it? So I used it as is. Again, that doesn't directly refute the idea of a turtle destruction wave, but it sure seems like that would have come up had it been the case. Instead, it comes across like the sounds hame just happened to go with Kame, and that together they rolled off the tongue and sounded kind of fun and silly. That's why I keep hammering home that kana doesn't inherently have meaning. Think about it this way. If I were to say TMNT, you might be aware that that can stand for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But that doesn't mean that NRA means Ninja Rifle Association, or that you parked your car on Level Ninja. The letter N doesn't have an inherent meaning. So yeah, if Toriyama had intended it to be a reference to destruction, he probably would have mentioned it. I mean, in the same interview he even acknowledges that the attack shares the name with Hawaiian Kings. At any rate, no one even tries to translate this one. The only minor point of contention is to whether to add a hyphen before the ha. But since part of this video series is about comparing localizations, it is worth noting that Funimation's dub in their early days, particularly when they were still using the Ocean voice cast, pronounced the attack two different ways. When it was being sounded out while powered up, they pronounced it the same way I've done here. But when it was simply being spoken of, it became Kamehameha! That's closer to how English speakers refer to the Hawaiian king name, but is pretty far off from Kamehameha, and fairly heavily dilutes the whole Kamehame joke. I don't think they do that anymore. In addition, they would often say Kamehameha wave. If you remember, the ha actually means wave, so this is akin to saying pin number. It's redundant. But given its dual duties of getting across the meaning of a foreign language while still preserving the original name, I can accept that. Geez, that took a while. Let's hope the next one is a little easier. I think it will be. It's the Taiyo-ken, the move that blinds people. I picked this one both because a lot of characters use it, sorry Tenshinhan, and because it follows a pattern that will help us as we continue forward. This one is written in kanji, so we know exactly what it means. The Taiyo refers to the sun, and ken literally means fist. However, it is used to denote a fighting style or technique. That's why Viz's translation of the manga refers to it as Fist of the Sun when it converts it at all, although that's relegated to the footnotes. That's about as direct a translation as you can get. Funimation's subtitled version, when they translate it at all, call it Solar Attack. It's ever so slightly less literal, but it conveys the same idea. Generally though, they both tend to leave it as Taiyo-ken. Funimation's dub plays this a little more loosely. They never use the Japanese name, referring to it exclusively as the solar flare. The part about it being a technique is removed, but the addition of flare makes a clearer association with a blinding flash. Those are all very different translations, but you can see where they're coming from. Kinda makes you miss the simplicity of when everyone was agreeing on Kamehameha. Still, this did take a lot less time to explain. Ken shows up in lots of Dragon Ball attack names, particularly from this era. It makes sense given what it means. That's why we have the Kaio-ken, Shio-ken, Shishin-no-ken, and of course our next stop, the Kaio-ken. Kaio-ken is one of my favorite techniques. It gives Goku a great burst of strength and speed, but at the risk of his own body's safety. Frankly, it's much more interesting than the endless stream of transformations that would follow it, but that's a story for a different video. Linguistically, Kaio-ken is similar to Taiyo-ken. As we just established, ken refers to a technique. Kaio-sama is the character who teaches this technique to Goku. The technique is named after him, and that's why it's called the Kaio-ken. This should be simple, but it's not. Most of the complications relate not to the technique itself, but to the character of Kaio. At the risk of expanding past the parameters of this particular video, it's somewhat necessary to talk about him. I mean, I could do a whole video on gods, and I probably will someday. But here we are. The kanji that make up Kaio's name literally mean world and king. Since Viz often uses the Japanese terms and their English translations in tandem with each other, they alternate between calling him Kaio-sama and the Lord of Worlds, which is a pretty accurate interpretation. That doesn't really have any effect on the attack name, which is rendered unchanged as Kaio-ken. As you might be able to tell by the translation, Kaio is less of a personal name than it is a title of function. And here's where it gets complicated. If, say, the localization you're following changes his name, that's going to throw this whole thing out of whack. Funimation's dub of the animated series uses a half translation with him, calling him King Kai. It's not wrong. The O in Kaio means king, so it's pretty easy to see the logic in King Kai, even if I don't think it's ideal in terms of communicating to an English-speaking audience what he is. But this is where the pileup of confusion starts. If the character isn't called Kaio, what happens to the Kaio-ken? Well, nothing. At least not insofar as how it's written. Unlike Solar Flare, they don't try to translate this. So that's a little confusing, right? A character called King Kai teaching the Kaio-ken? Maybe you'd spot the connection. Well, you might have, except for the fact that using the same logic that turned Saya into Seiya for Goku's people, Funimation took one look at Kaio-ken, almost certainly did not make the connection as to what it meant, and decided it was pronounced Kaio-ken.
I was trained in the art of Kaio-ken.
Huh? Kaio-ken?
So now instead of Kaio teaching the Kaio-ken, which is pretty straightforward, we have King Kai teaching the Kaio-ken, and everything has been reduced to complete gibberish. I think I've even seen people assume that it was spelled Kaio-ken, like the abbreviation of knockout. And I can't blame them for that. Clearly their brains are trying to make some sense out of this, tie these random sounds to something they can relate to. And that's not even getting into Funimation scriptwriters calling one of Goku's attacks during that era the Triple Strike.
The power of a triple strike!
A triple strike?
If you know what the Triple Strike is, please leave me a comment. I remember when some of the earliest English translated games on the PlayStation 2 came over here, everybody was making fun of how wrong they supposedly translated Kaio-ken. Laugh at King Kai Fist all you want. I will. It is pretty clunky sounding. But I hope it's clear to you now that as far as staying within the parameters of Funimation's naming conventions, this actually communicates the meaning of the attack far better than Kaio-ken ever could. So yeah, Funimation made a total mess of this one without even changing a letter, but to their credit, they do occasionally get it right, such as in the early movies, and then later with Dragon Ball Kai.
3 times Kaio-ken!
So good for them. Have you ever wondered why no one ever argues over Vegeta's attack names? Why does everyone say Big Bang Attack and Final Flash without a single translation variation? Why isn't someone calling it Large Slam Fist or Last Flare or something? Well, that's because Vegeta's attacks are in English. There's nothing to translate. They're just written and said in Japanese approximations of the English words, and it's extraordinarily easy to tell what they're supposed to be. So yeah, these are laughably simple. They appear to be like this to set Vegeta apart. The heroes of Dragon Ball's Earth are modeled after traditional Eastern martial artists. Their attacks are in kanji, they master their ki. Vegeta and his allies rely on futuristic technology like scouters, which are also called the English word even in Japanese. He's exotic and alien, and so having his attack names be in English helps cement that. Well, it does in Japanese. It is kinda lost when it's set alongside other English attack names like Solar Flare. He's not quite as unique anymore. As if the poor guy hasn't suffered enough being elevated to the second most important character in Dragon Ball. It's not fair! But now let's get back to attacks that actually have translations. creating invents one of the most creative attacks in the series. It's the Kienzan, a spinning disc of energy that can seemingly cut through anything. Its name is made of 3 kanji. The first is ki, referring to the spiritual energy that these attacks are made from. I'm amazed it's taken us this long to get to an attack with ki in the name. The second is en, or circle, and the third is zan, or cut. It's a cutting circle of ki, a slicing ki disc, if you will. Pretty descriptive. Viz leaves this untranslated in dialogue, but in their footnotes they call it circle of chi or ki. They actually tend to use the Chinese chi in dialogue rather than ki, so this is their way of splitting the difference. Or slicing the difference, because it's like a sharp razor. But this is decent. They lose the cutting part, but the remaining parts are fairly literal. I guess they figure cutting is implied. Still, it sounds kinda weak to me as far as names go. On the opposite extreme, Funimation's dub jettisons Kienzan and rather infamously goes with Destructo Disc. Obviously, they're prioritizing what sounds catchy. It has alliteration going on, similar to their renaming of Goku's Nyoibo to Power Pole. The disc part is pretty spot on. Destructo, well, seems to be a shortened corruption of destruction. Oh my god. We're back to this word again? Did we lap ourselves? Who keeps inviting destruction to the party? Could've just called it the Hame disc, but no, they clearly don't listen to the fan theories. If you want to be really generous, you could say destruction is in the same very general ballpark as cutting. But yeah, it's because it sounded fun. You know it, I know it, we all know it. I saved a doozy for our final attack of the day. It's the attack name so complicated it's become a meme.
Makankosappo.
Yes, it's Piccolo's Makankosappo. So many sounds, so many kanji. Kami help us all. There are 5 of them, and they literally mean, in order, demon, pierce, light, kill, and cannon. For anybody who is familiar with Piccolo's nomenclature, the ma that opens this is fairly well known. Piccolo is a demon. A lot of his attacks and titles and aliases use ma, like Daimao, Great Demon King, and Ma Jr. The rest are pretty self-explanatory. It indeed pierces and kills and is used by a demon. Still, it's definitely a mouthful. Fans for years have tried to cobble together a name that includes the whole meaning and actually sounds like something somebody would want to say. Demon Light Piercing Kill Cannon? Demon Piercing Light Cannon of Death? Oh, I got it. Cannon that is used by demons and pierces with light in order to kill its target. Perfect, no notes. It's a toughie, I admit, but let's see how our localizers did. Funimation presents another fairly famous or infamous style choice here.
Special beam cannon.
Special Beam Cannon. Well, they got the cannon part in there. Beam? Could be a beam of light. Special? Who's mommy's special little demon? No, that's not even close to anything in the name. It is interesting though. It's a name that is incredibly easy to remember, that no dubbed Dragon Ball fan is ever going to mistake for anything else, while simultaneously being a name so generic, it could easily be used to refer to about 70% of the attacks in this franchise. This could be a special beam cannon. So could this, and even this. Well, Viz has consistently brought us more literal translations. Let's see if they can save us again. Light of Death. Wow, they didn't even try with this one. What's there is correct, but it's not much of it. Sounds pretty dumb and generic, and unlike most of their other attacks, they don't even show it in Japanese. I know this is one of the earliest things they adapted, but this is so outside of their usual style. Did they just run out of panel space to write any of this? Well, if you smush them both together, you get Special Light Beam Cannon of Death, which manages to incorporate just over half of the kanji involved in the original name. So, nobody is really good here? Well, except for the subtitled version, it's perfect. But I don't know if there's a way to win with this one. It's a lot. The best thing I recommend is just learn how to say Makankosappo. It's fun!
The Makankosappo.
Yeah, close enough. As an addendum, just like with Kaio-ken, Funimation's later dub of Dragon Ball Kai, or Dragon Ball Z Kai as they call it, does use Makankosappo and Kienzan, or Kienzan? Kienzed? You listen to it.
Kienzan?
It does seem like that was a flash in the pan though, as I'm told they've returned to their traditional nomenclature since then and weren't even consistent across multiple versions of Kai itself. Look, I haven't watched the dub in nearly 25 years, so I'm doing the best I can to compile all of this. Unlike with character names, Funimation was at least willing to experiment with greater fidelity to the source material once in a while, but that does make it harder for me to be aware of all the twists and turns in a product I don't really engage with. But as always, I hope I've been able to give you a fun, general overview of some of the differences and the logic behind them. So that's it for today. Wow, that is much denser material than character names. From kana to kanji to translations to English, there's a lot to figure out, and that's why I say it's just easier to leave them as is. Everybody likes fancy martial arts words. Where would my generation be without repeating Hadouken ad nauseum? But I do appreciate Viz's general style of calling the attack by its name, but throwing in a translation at the bottom. It is helpful to know what they mean so you don't get confused when an attack is named after a character. Thanks so much for watching. I hope there's a lot you can learn about Dragon Ball from me, but seriously, if you don't already, you should be using the database at kanzenshuu.com. If there is anything you want to know about Dragon Ball, from guides to translations, they have it. I work hard on these videos, so I'd appreciate it if you could give me all of your engagement. If you're new here, I host an ongoing series, Dragon Ball Dissection, where I go this in-depth, but with the story. And if you can, please, please, please sign up to support me on Patreon. Not only will you help me earn a living, but you'll get rewards like your name in the credits and early access to videos. Thanks so much for your support, and I'll see you next time.